Going into the latter half of the 1990s, Universal Studios' Halloween Horror Nights was at an all-time high as it was the must-attend Halloween event around the world. With excellent live entertainment and terrifying haunted mazes, thousands of guests would flock to Orlando, Florida to face their worst fears, but also have a great time during the Halloween season. With that, Universal would continue to evolve the event with more elaborate mazes, with fascinating backstories, new entertainment offerings, and more emphasis on marketing. Let us journey into fear and see how that came to be. This is SP History. Following 1995's The Curse of the Crypt Keeper event, Universal would bring back Halloween Horror Nights in 1996 for 15 nights between mid-October to early November, adding 3 more nights from the previous year. With the marketing, Universal would continue to use a slogan to encapsulate the whole event, and this year it would be Journey into Fear. Though featuring a slogan, there would not be a main icon to headline the event, but last year's icon, the Crypt Keeper, would have a presence in its duration. Halloween Horror Nights 6 would once again feature 3 haunted houses, but only 1 scare zone this time. There would also be 3 stage shows and 1 new offering, which we will discuss shortly. One of the houses in the event would once again be in the Earthquake queue and still feature the character of the Crypt Keeper, being named the Crypt Keeper Studio Tour of Terror. Unlike last year's Crypt Keeper's Dungeon of Terror, guests would now venture into a ghoulish soundstage and backlot as the Crypt Keeper unleashes his monsters and maniacs upon you. The famous Rat Lady would be in this house for the year. The next house would be located in Nazareth and be called Toy Hell Nightmare in the Scream Factory. The story behind the house was that workers at a toy factory were creating children's toys with human body parts that made them possessed. This would leave the factory abandoned, but now guests would enter it where the toys are now alive and looking for vengeance against their creators and you. Different horrific versions of toys would be in the house, such as Baby Jane and Barbie. The last house to be in this year would be Universal's new House of Horrors, located in Soundstage 22. This would be a new iteration of last year's house, but with a new story and new characters. The storyline was that guests would enter a wax museum, which during its construction was struck by lightning and made all the wax sculptures come to life. To the guests' dismay, these sculptures were of classic Universal monsters and modern-day horror icons. So, the house would be divided between classic characters and new characters. Classic monsters would consist of Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Mummy, and more, while the real-life horrors, how Universal would phrase them, featured characters like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and Michael Myers. Alongside with the houses, there would be 1 scare zone, which was the return in Midway of the Bazaar and Amity Village, which would be very similar to the first year's iteration. 3 shows would be in the event. Not surprisingly, Bill and Ted's Excellent Halloween Adventure would be one of them, as it continued the tradition with the dynamic duo, meeting up with that year's cast of pop culture characters, having a good old rocking time. The other shows were Tricks, Treats, and Trance, a magic show held in the Animals Actor Stage, and Welcome to My Nightmare, located near Mel's Drive-In, a concert show where cover bands play music from classic rock bands like Alice Cooper and Kiss. But the highlight of this year's entertainment would be an all-new experience that was not all too foreign to Universal. This would be the event's first Halloween-themed parade called the Crypt Keeper's Festival of the Dead Parade. With the Crypt Keeper being the Grand Marshal, a cast of goons and monsters would walk and ride on floats around the park, throwing beads and coins to guests and having a good ghoulish time. The parade was essentially another version of their Mardi Gras parade, which was their other big annual event. This would also be the reason that this year's event will only feature 1 scare zone, as the route of the parade would go through the location of the previous scare zone, Horrorwood. But regardless, it was a hit and brought a new experience that guests would love, similarly to what Bill and Ted did in 1992. With that, Halloween Horror Nights 6 Journey into Fear would elevate the event even more than it did already. Continuing the success of the 1996 event, Halloween Horror Nights would come again in 1997, but with even more nights up to 18 days. The year would consist of the same number of houses, scare zones, and shows, but the notable aspect of this year was their main marketing. They would only use 1 image and 1 word to capture the event, which would be Frightmares. The image consisted of a little green demon character named Igor biting down on the eyelid of an unexpected victim, touting the phrase, "You will never sleep again." It was a striking image that would command your attention and excited many guests to return to the famed Halloween event. Like stated, there would be 3 houses featured in 1997. The first one would be titled Hotel Hell. Located in Nazareth, this house had guests entering a haunted hotel, formerly being the trendiest in the New York area, now ran by hostile ghosts and bums. As guests voyaged into the hotel's different sections, one goal was in mind: escape in one piece. The second house would be in the earthquake queue, being named Tombs of Terror. Not being related to the Dungeon of Terror, as you may think from its name, it was a completely new concept where you would enter into a New Orleans cemetery that was infested with bloodthirsty vampires, mutants, and deranged chainsaw maniacs. This is the first year to feature an all-new house in this location, rather than a Dungeon of Terror or a house hosted by the Crypt Keeper, who was not also seen at all during this year. The third and final house, located in Soundstage 22, would be the third version of a house based on classic and modern horror film monsters called Universal's Museum of Horror. This house would be very similar to the last iteration, but differences was that the storyline was altered, as it was the history museum where the monsters came to life rather than a wax museum, and the side of the house with modern day monsters would feature new characters like Ghostface from Scream and Candyman. Midway of the Bazaar would once again be the only scare zone during the event, featuring the same aspects but now added carnival games for guests to enjoy. With the shows, Bill and Ted would headline again with two other shows complementing with Abracadaver and Frightmares. The Festival of the Dead parade would return, dropping the Crypt Keeper's name out of the title, and be themed towards the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Most floats returned from last year, but a new float was added, dedicated to the Lord of Darkness. Overall, Halloween Horror Nights 7, Frightmares, would be a worthy addition to the early history of the event, showing that there was boundless creativity Universal had in creating their Halloween celebration. Proceeding to the next year of 1998, Halloween Horror Nights returned for its 8th time with a 19-day duration during October, carrying a new slogan, Primal Scream. The root of its marketing featured a striking image of a golden screaming face, advertising the last scream you will ever hear. Unlike 96 and 97, the event will now feature 5 haunted mazes in which 2 pairs of them were interconnected. The midway of the Bizarre Scare Zone will return, still in Amity, but reported being bigger than ever, and the 4 shows would occur with Bill and Ted headlining as usual. The Festival of the Dead parade would run again, bringing returning floats and a new float featuring the killer doll Chucky and his bride Tiffany, who are coming off the release of the Bride of Chucky film. But let us begin discussing the houses, the highlight of this year. The first house would be in the usual house placement location in Nazareth and would be called Hell's High. The story behind this house was that guests would enter a high school where a slasher movie was being filmed, but as shooting began, the villains and actors began to become possessed by murderers and would kill anyone who dared to wander on their set. The villain of the supposed slasher film was called Michael Krueger, and it was an obvious looking hybrid between Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, and shared a name with Michael Myers. This house would be the only one during this year to not be a part of a dual house. The other 4 houses were a part of 2 different stories but had 2 separate house experiences. One of the pair would be SS Frightanic, Carnage Crew, and the Fear and First Class. Both being located in the earthquake queue, these houses were interconnected with a storyline, being a horror parody of the 1997 film Titanic, where guests would dare to journey into a luxury cruise liner named SS Frightanic, which had been sailing out of San Francisco to Hawaii, would be sucked into a black hole during its voyage and enter another dimension. The ship would return to the docks of San Francisco, and due to its life-altering voyage, the crew would go insane and the ship would be forever haunted by ghosts who would terrorize any living soul that entered. With that storyline, the 2 individual houses took guests through different parts of the ship. Carnage Crew would be the poor, dingy parts of the ship, as Fear and First Class would be the fancier areas of the ship. The other pair of interconnected houses were called Universal's Museum of Horror, Chamber of Horrors, and Unnatural History. Sharing the same story from the previous year's house, now the concept would be divided into 2 different houses. Chamber of Horrors would be the house consisted of the classic Universal monsters who had been regulars of the event for many years at this point, and Unnatural History would be the house featuring new horror icons which were seen in the last 2 years and included new additions from films such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Shining. With that, Halloween Horror Nights Primal Scream would introduce new concepts of how houses are constructed and promoted, making Universal the masterminds of horror-based attractions. Now coming into the final year of the 20th century, Universal wanted to make sure they end this year with more great Halloween fun. Now in its 9th year, they would create another unique slogan for the event, which would be Last Gasp. Its main marketing image was a depiction of the classic Universal monster, the Mummy, claiming to guests, "Save your final breath, you will need it for screaming," making 1999's Halloween Horror Nights a must-attend. 5 houses would headline, with Midway of the Bazaar as the only scare zone in the same location, and only 2 shows, Bill and Ted and Deadly Delusions. Also returning was the Festival of the Dead Parade, with some new floats based on different creepy animals and characters. This year had a collection of 5 houses, once again featuring fascinating backstories and sets. The first house would be located in the earthquake queue, being called Doomsday. Playing on the real-life theorized event that once Y2K hit, all electronics would fail, causing the end of days. Guests would journey underground of New York City, where guests fled after the Y2K event, and everyone who inhabits the space fight for the right to live. The house had zombie-like characters and rope scare actors that would scare the guests. The next house would also be in the earthquake queue, being based off the main marketed character of the event and the new successful 1999 film, The Mummy. The house will take guests through the mysterious ancient tomb seen in the film, where the ancient priest and Imhotep himself look to claim your soul. Moving along, Soundstage 22 would hold 2 houses that were semi-interconnected with each other but had 2 completely different storylines. First, one was called Insanity. The story behind this house was guests would enter the Fairyville Sanitarium, where the inmates have taken over and you must endure their torture without losing your own sanity. The other house would be the return of Norman Bates with his own house called Psycho through the mind of Norman Bates. What made this house different from the previous iterations based on the IP was, instead of sets being based off the film, the house mainly focused on the imagination of the killer. How this house relates to Insanity: the beginning of the house would start in the reception area of the Fairyville Sanitarium, suggesting Norman Bates was an inmate inside there and you're entering his mind while in captivity. The final house to be featured during the event is Universal Creature Features in 3D. Being the 5th house to feature the classic Universal monsters, Universal would make it stand out from the previous, as it would be the first ever house to include a 3D element inside. Guests would be handed 3D glasses before entering, and as they walked through, the rooms would be painted with bright neon colors, which made the rooms pop out more than ever. This would start a trend with 3D houses to come in the years following this event. And with that, Universal was able to complete another successful year of Halloween Horror Nights, creating more new aspects and building upon the lore of the famous event. Halloween Horror Nights between the years 1996 and 1999 had a collection of outstanding events that introduced brand new house concepts, shows, and a parade that raised the bar for all Halloween events. Universal was able to solidify they were the only place where people should celebrate Halloween, but as Halloween Horror Nights enters the new century, this would be an end of an era, as there would be some iconic years ahead.